Because it has been so long since I've done basically any video, but any what I've read this month videos, I figured instead of just doing my April reads, I'm just going to show you what I've read for the whole entire year. So the first book I have is Empire of Storms, which this is the 5th book in the Throne of Glass series. If you guys don't know what the Throne of Glass series is, you should really read it. But it is about this girl named Selena, and she is an assassin. At least in the first book, she gets like contracted to do this tournament for the king to be his personal assassin. This series takes like a complete 180 or 360, I don't know which one it is, from that like original plot line. The whole series itself has a lot of high stakes fantasy in it. It's got a lot of fae and magic. There's so much that goes on and so much that happens in these books. It took me, I'd say, probably about 2 months to read this book. I read it from like December to February of this year. And because it took me so long to read and because it's such a long book, I like forgot what kind of happened in this one. I didn't forget, but like I just wasn't as invested in this book, and that's kind of happened to me with this whole entire series, which is so sad because when I read like the first book, I think even the second book, and maybe even a part of the third book, I was so excited. I absolutely adored this series, and it's so good if you love fantasy. I do feel like this book is slightly kind of like a filler book. A lot does happen, but there's a lot of downtime. I feel like there was a lot of in-between time. There's a lot of switching between characters in this book and the point of views, because there's like 2 separate groups happening. Actually, more like 3 separate groups happening. They switch between the characters' point of views a lot. One thing I was a little bit frustrated with, and I don't know if it's something that she normally does in these books, Sarah J. Maas, because it's been so long since I read the other ones, I cannot remember, but I know specifically in this book, Sarah J. Maas would jump between characters' point of views within the same chapter, or even like, I swear to God, within the same paragraph. It was so confusing. I couldn't follow a lot of the time like the train of thought and who was actually talking. One male would talk, but it would be a first person point of view with his thoughts, and then the next sentence in the same paragraph would literally be another male talking in like the conversation, but with his first person thoughts in his own head. And I couldn't always tell when she was switching, so like I had to be really careful when I was reading. And at least for me, when I read fantasy, sometimes it's a little bit hard for me to pay attention. My mind kind of like drifts off into other places. This is just like with me with any book ever, and it was definitely happening with this one. The stuff that happens at the end of this book is seriously like, oh my gosh, it's gonna set up really great for the end of the series for the end book. The next book in this series is Tower of Dawn. And this one is not actually the end of the book, or end of the series. There's one more book in the series after this. It's Kingdom of Ash, but there is this in-between book. When I finished this one, I was like so ready to just be done with this series, and it's not because I don't love it, it's just because I was in such a reading slump for so many years that reading this book just kind of felt like a chore, because I've been reading it for so long because it's such a long series. There's 8 books in this series with the novella book, which you should read. It's like a prequel novella book. It's really great. So that's why I didn't immediately pick up Tower of Dawn and start reading it. But also I found out that Tower of Dawn has the exact same timeline as Empire of Storms. And there's this thing that a lot of people do where they will tandem read these 2 books. Tandem read meaning like they will jump back and forth between the 2 books based off of the timeline. I think to read Tower of Dawn, I might go back and reread both of these. I know I just said that like I kind of just want to get the series over with, but I also kind of just want to go back and like really immerse myself and really enjoy this story for real before I get to the last book, because I really, really want to just like leave this series off on a high note and not spend 2+ months on one book and forget everything that happens. On the internet, I found different people who wrote which chapters you should read in which order, so I went ahead and like made little like annotations on when I should flip back and forth between the 2 books. I think to read Tower of Dawn, I might just do that, which is gonna take me a long time, but I think it'll make me appreciate this series so much more, and I won't be as bored reading just Tower of Dawn. So the next book is Beach Read by Emily Henry, and I gave this book 4 stars on Goodreads, but like thinking through it afterwards, I think I gave it more like a 3.5 stars. This is the first book that I've ever read by Emily Henry, and I think this is actually her debut novel. I could be wrong on that, but I'm pretty sure it is. I liked the story. It was a good story, but I did listen to it on audiobook, and it did take me 2 months to get through. I listened to it at pretty much the exact same time that I read Empire of Storms, so like pretty much the exact 2-month timeline that I read that book. I also read Beach Read through audiobook. For some reason with this book, maybe it was just the audible narration or that I was still like in a reading slump at this time, I just like couldn't immerse myself in the story. My mind kept drifting when I was listening to the audiobook. Maybe it was the person who narrated it. I'm not really sure. So this book is marketed as a romance book. However, I do think that Emily Henry always has an undertone of just like literary fiction in her books, and I feel like that's more of the book than the romances. Especially in this one, I feel like there was so much subplot of the backstories that happened between the two main characters. I can't even remember their names at this point. Gus is the male character. I don't even remember what the female character's name is at this point. But anyways, she has a lot going on. First of all, I didn't even say what this book is about. Female character that I can't remember her name. She moves to this small town because her dad died. She takes over his beach house that she inherited from him, and she doesn't want to live there. So she's there to basically have a getaway. She's got to pack up the whole house. She's got to like deal with all the memories from that. But then also in the meantime, she's writing her next novel. So she is an author. She is like slacking on writing her next novel because she doesn't have the inspiration because of all the stuff that's been going on in her past. And in the meantime, she realizes that she moves right next door to Gus, who is our other main character, the male lead. And he is also an author, and the two of them slowly get to know each other. This is an enemies to lover trope, so if you like that type of stuff, you might like this book. But there is a very, very heavy, I'd say it's mostly the plot, is like their backstories and the trauma that they're going through and like the romance. In this story, at least, it's kind of more of the side plot. I was hoping for more of just like a romance storyline, so I think that that's why this book was like not hitting it for me. I just wanted to get into more of the juicy details, not even like the spicy stuff, but just like more of the actual fun and banter and romance between the two characters and see that blossom instead of the like hard hitting, emotional stuff that was happening on the side with the female character. I also just felt like there wasn't enough chemistry between the two characters. I feel like they didn't show it enough. I don't know. Maybe I'm like skewing it in my brain because it took me so long to listen to it. And when I was listening to it, my brain would sometimes like go off in other directions. And when I'm listening to an audiobook, if I'm listening to it like when I'm on a walk with my son, if he starts talking or like trying to get my attention while we're on a walk while he's in the stroller, my mind will start to drift and I like won't listen to the words or I'll rewind them and then like I still won't pay attention slightly. So it might just be that I just didn't like give it enough of a chance. 3.5 star read for me. Maybe it would be better if I actually read it like a normal book in a normal amount of time. Because I was in so much of a reading slump, I started watching booktube videos again, which I hadn't done in a really long time, honestly. I watched them here and there, but not enough to like make me want to really pick up reading again. And I really immersed myself in the booktube community over the beginning of the year, and I got really excited to start reading again. But I didn't want to put myself in a reading slump. I wanted some quick, easy, fun reads, and so I actually bought I think 5 or 6 books. I bought some like cozy fantasy books. I bought some romance books, all books that were like super short because after Empire of Storms, I was just not having it anymore. My brain could not handle a giant, high stakes, long fantasy. I just needed super quick, short reads to feel like I was accomplished. So the first one I ended up reading was Legends and Lattes by Travis Baldree. And this book, guys, first of all, I rated it 5 stars. And honestly, the feelings that this book gave me when I was reading it, it's still a 5-star read for me. It is the cutest, easiest to read. It's literally like 300 pages. It's not even 300 pages. It's like 290 something. It is the quickest, easiest, cutest, cozy fantasy book I haven't read a lot of cozy fantasy, but out of the couple that I've read so far, this is the best one. And so it's about Viv. She's an orc, and let me just read. It says, after a lifetime of bounties and bloodshed, Viv is hanging up her sword for the last time. The battle-weary orc aims to start fresh, opening the first ever coffee shop in the city of Thune. But rivals old and new stand in the way of success, not to mention the fact that no one has the faintest idea what coffee actually is. I cannot read today. I am so sorry. If Viv wants to put the blade behind her and make her plans a reality, she won't be able to go it alone. But the true rewards of the uncharted path are the travelers you meet along the way, and whether drawn together by ancient magic, a flaky pastry, or a freshly brewed cup of coffee, they might become partners, family, and something deeper than she ever could have dreamed. So, if any of that sounds great to you, you should definitely pick this book up. It was just so fun and quirky and cozy. I just wanted to see Viv succeed so bad. The character itself wasn't even like that, I would say, like super well-rounded. It was just like a very straightforward character. The other characters were also just like super straightforward characters, but they were all super just cozy, and that's all I can say. This book just like is a warm cup of coffee. It just warms my heart every time I think about it. I loved this book. I read it super fast. I feel like I read it within like a week. I know that doesn't seem super fast, but at the time I was trying to get back into reading. I just kept wanting to see what new things she was going to be putting on the menu. I wanted to see, you know, all the new people that she was hiring and their personalities, and they all just like work together so great. This is an awesome found family story. So if you love that, if you love cozy fantasy, if you love found family, if you love low stakes, if you just want something warm to just like, you know, burst your heartstrings, I don't know if that's the right term, but it was adorable, and I highly recommend picking this book up. So even though I didn't have the greatest experience with Beach Read, I still generally enjoyed the story. It just wasn't like a super, super high rating for me. So I thought I'd pick up another Emily Henry book. That was one of the books I bought in that giant book haul that I had. That book was Book Lovers by Emily Henry. This one, I rated a 4-star. It was definitely better for me than Beach Read. Maybe because I read it in a shorter period of time. Let's see. It says it took me 9 days to read this book. So definitely better than 2 months, and reading it with like my actual eyeballs versus an audiobook, I think for sure helped me because I could be a little bit more immersed in the storyline. This book is about Nora and Charlie. Nora is a publicist, I think she is. Hold up. I can't remember exactly what she does. A book agent? I think that's what she's called, something along those lines. And Gus also works in the publishing industry. He is an editor. The two of them met. It was about one of Nora's clients. They didn't start off on the right foot. Nora had a very bad taste in her mouth about Charlie, and then they didn't see each other for 2 years after that. So Nora's sister wants to take a trip to Sunshine Falls, which is actually the location that one of Nora's clients bases her book around. Nora's sister really, really wants to go and take a month-long vacation in Sunshine Falls and just like really get away from life, and she wants Nora to come with her, and the two of them want to rekindle their like sisterly bond. And that's when Nora runs into Gus, and everything just kind of happens from there. There is still the backstory and like subplot of what's going on with like Nora and her sister, but it was a little bit more tolerable to me in this book because I think Nora and Gus had such a great chemistry. Their banter back and forth was so freaking adorable. Gus was such a great person, but I also did enjoy the parts of the book that talked about Nora and her sister. There were some like heavier topics in this, not like anything crazy, but it did go a little bit deeper into that. It wasn't all like surface level stuff. The small town vibes in this were great. The sisterly bond stuff in here was great. The romance was actually really good in this book. It was definitely like a slow burn romance, and it's enemies to lovers. So it's super fun because they talk about a lot of book tropes in this book because they're both in like the book publishing industry. Nora relates herself and like her life to certain book tropes. So you know the trope where there's a small town and the girl goes and meets a small town boy and they fall in love even though the girl has a boyfriend back home or a love interest back home and he's just not right for her, but this small town guy is this amazing person. Well, it's kind of like that for her in this book except for Flip. So she's the one who's being left behind because she's the cold-hearted bee in like apparently every boyfriend of her story. She is super driven, super hardworking, super cold apparently. That's the trope that she thinks she is, and that every single boyfriend that she has leaves her for, you know, the small town romance with another girl that they fall in love with whenever they go on like a work trip or just a vacation or whatever. They always seem to leave her. But in reality, Nora is not that person. She's actually super heartfelt and kind. I love how this book did not change her personality. Yes, she goes to like a small town and she falls in love in a small town, but it's so much different than that. It's not that small town, you know, change and uproot your whole entire life type of story. So I really did like the way that this book portrayed the romance in here and didn't change the main character. So the next book I have here is also a super cozy fantasy, and that is The House in the Cerulean Sea by TJ Klune. I gave this book 3.5 stars. I think I originally gave it a 4-star when I read it, but I have slightly started to become skewed by reading other people's reviews after the book. I'm not super critical of books when I'm reading them, I think, because I just like to enjoy the story, and I will pretty much enjoy anything. But then I start reading people's reviews that weren't as great after the fact, and then I'm like, oh, like that did actually happen. Oh, maybe that's why I was a little bit bored during the book. And I started to become a little bit more critical of the books after the fact when reading other people's reviews, and this is one of those books. This is a low-stakes cozy fantasy as well. It's found family. This book is about Linus Baker, who works in like the government. In this world, there are magical children. These children pretty much all live in these like orphanages. They're not really orphanages. They're just like homes for these magical children because they are kind of still like not accepted in society. So the government kind of just like placed them in these homes. And I think even people that like have magical children, they kind of were like ousted by their own families and put in these homes, which is very sad. So the government does generally try to protect these children, and that's where the department in charge of magical youth comes in, and Linus Baker is a caseworker for that part of the government. What his job is to go into these orphanages and just make sure that everything is running properly, that the kids are safe, that they're taken care of. He is one day called into extremely upper management. He is told that he's got to go on assignment on this island, and the children are dangerous, and it's like level 4 classified, and so he has to be there for a month. There, everything completely changes. It's not what he seems. These children aren't what they seem. And then there's Arthur, who is the master of the orphanage, and he just gets to know all of them, and his views on things change. And it was a very, very cute, cozy fantasy. I do feel like the romance element in this book was a little bit forced, because I feel like most of the story does revolve around the children. The romance subplot, I feel like, just wasn't as like fleshed out, and so when it finally happens, I just wasn't as invested. I think that I was a little bit bored near the end of this reading it as well. I read it over the course of like 10 days, which again isn't that long, but I feel like I just got a little bit bored reading this. It was super fun. I do recommend it. Maybe I just don't like children in books. I think that might be it. Maybe I just don't like books that revolve around small children, because these were all small children, like 10 or under. And I think that I just got bored reading it because it was so low stakes and so like wholesome, because I like the Legends and Lattes book, right? But I feel like this one was just so, I don't know, there's just something about it. Again, maybe I just don't like children in books, or maybe it was just the way that this book was written. But it was super cute. It was super cozy. It was really wholesome. And if you like that type of aspect, if you want just like a really easy read, I highly recommend this book. The next book I have is a romance book, and I was super excited to read this one because the reviews on this one were amazing, and that is The Honeymooners by Christina Lauren. And I've realized that these are two separate people. I did not know that at first. I loved this book. I ended up rating it 4 stars. The first half of this book, 5 stars. 5-star read for me. The banter between the two characters was amazing. First of all, let me tell you what this book is about before I get ahead of myself. So this book is about Olive and Ethan, and the premise of it is actually kind of funny. So Olive's sister and Ethan's brother are getting married. So Olive and Ethan have known each other for a very long time. Olive has always like hated Ethan. Olive thinks that Ethan has always hated her. And so they've kind of always been like enemies, and Olive like really hates Ethan. Like they just don't get along at all. We pretty much start off this book with Olive's sister's wedding. Everybody in the whole entire wedding ends up eating the seafood buffet at the wedding except for Olive and Ethan. Everyone ends up getting sick, like violently ill at this wedding except for Olive and Ethan. It's so bad that her sister can't go on the honeymoon. So Olive and her sister are actually twins, so she's able to take over her sister's honeymoon because her sister actually won this honeymoon, and nobody else can take the honeymoon in her place, but because they are twin sisters, she has to pretend that she's her sister, and Ethan is able to go because he has his brother's last name. But they hate each other, right? So now they have to spend this romantic like honeymoon together, pretending to be their siblings. The banter between these two is just like completely off the charts. I think I liked this book so much, or at least the beginning of this book so much, because it was like completely about the romance. There was nothing else going on. There was like this tiny little subplot that was happening that we didn't delve that much into. It was just kind of there. The banter between these two, the romance between these two was just like, the way that it developed over the course of the honeymoon was just like so cute and so amazing. One thing that I think is pretty obvious from the start, and I noticed like as soon as I'm reading it, so I don't feel bad telling you, is that like Olive completely misread the situation. Ethan has been nice like the whole entire time. The beginning of the book, when she's talking to him, he was nice. The middle of the book, the end of the book, like every part of the book, he was super nice to her, and she would misread every single communication that she had with him and turn it into something completely that it was not. So she just like put these things in her head about him from their first meeting together. She placed this like stigma on him that he was this like mean asshole, and he just isn't. The whole time I'm like, really, Olive? Like, he's been like nice to you this whole time, and this is how like you act around him? He's just kind of taken it and hasn't really like defended himself. Some other shenanigans happen in the book, which is super fun, that make them have to like really pretend to be themselves. So that part of the book just like upped the banter factor and like made them fall in love a little bit more, which was really fun. That little like subplot that you kind of heard about earlier in the book is what happens at the end of the book. It's like the third act conflict in this book. I just wasn't having it. I wasn't happy with it. It just felt like a completely different story. It just wasn't interesting or fun for me to read anymore. So that's why it got turned into a 1 or a 4-star, and I got dropped down 1 star from a 5-star. And I felt like Ethan's character kind of just like took a 180. The way that he reacted to certain situations just like didn't make any sense. Like no normal like adult would react that way when Olive is having certain things happen and like certain experiences happen to her. Ethan just like reacted in a way that completely just didn't make sense to me. I'm like, this is so obvious that this is happening. Why are you denying it so hard? I felt like it was kind of just like shoved in there just to shove it in there. And if I was Olive, I don't know if I would have been as forgiving. This book was amazing as a romance read. I would still very, very much recommend reading this. I thought the first 2/3 of this book was super amazing. Even the last third was still great. I know that Olive's family was like a decent part of this. I feel like her family, even though they were in such a small part of this book, I feel like they were super fun. They were super fleshed out. Like her whole, just everyone around her was just super fun to read about. So the next one I read was an audiobook, and this one took me about 10 days to get through, which wasn't too bad. And I was decently able to pay attention to the story this time. And that book is The Things We Never Got Over by Lucy Score. And I gave this book 3.5 stars. I feel like that might be a little bit harsh. I did really, really enjoy this story, and I wouldn't even really necessarily look at my 3.5 star rating and say like, oh, like I shouldn't read that. I definitely still do really recommend this book if you love romance books. It is highly, highly recommended. It's a highly, highly rated book, and I did really like it. I just think that there was a couple things in here that just like made me cringe just like a little bit. So this book is about Knox and Naomi. Naomi ends up driving to knock him out to bail her twin sister out of a sticky situation. And when she gets there, she immediately runs into Knox. And Knox is an a-hole, for lack of a better term, like immediately to her, because he thinks that she is her sister and her sister is a terrible, terrible human being. From there, the two of them just immediately like clash, and Knox just like hates her from the start. Naomi's this super, super nice person, and only is trying to be like nice to Knox, and he just doesn't want to give her the time of day, and he just like immediately hates her. But anyways, when she gets there, her sister is gone, and she ends up having to watch her niece that she didn't know existed. She basically gets custody of her 11-year-old niece, and she has to pretty much start over in this town of Knockemout because she ran away from her wedding. Her sister stole her car and a bunch of her money. Knox, from the start, even though he was like an asshole to her and like really mean to her like the whole entire time, he was doing nice things for her. So he got her a place to stay. He bought her a phone. He bought her, or not, he didn't, did he buy her a car too? No, he helped her find a car. But like, he was like the nicest person in that respect, just like constantly doing things for her. And even though he didn't have to, he was always constantly doing stuff for her. But he was like treating her like crap and like saying he didn't like her and just like so like grumpy and moody and gruff. And like that was his whole character trait, was like grump master. During this whole time, they eventually do start to slowly like fall in love with each other. Knox says that Naomi is not his type, and that's why he doesn't want to get involved with her, because his stuff was always like short flings, and she is the type of person that's like clingy and wants a relationship. According to Knox, this is the type of stuff that he thinks about Naomi, that he doesn't even know anything about her technically, because he's never really gotten to know her. The like subplot with Naomi taking care of her niece Waylay was like super cute and fun, and like seeing that relationship was really, really fun to watch and watch that develop. And Waylay is like a super cool kid. Even though she lived with her horrible mother who basically abandoned her, she was like a decently well-rounded child already and didn't really have like a ton of trauma. The things that I had a little bit of a problem with was pretty much Knox. I don't know why he had to be so rude. I'm like, I don't know, maybe people really like that like bad boy moody aesthetic in a man, but like I feel like he took it too far. I feel like he was like slightly possessive, slightly controlling in the way that he spoke to her. And like, we get both point of views. We get Naomi's point of view and we get Knox's point of view in the book. And like the scenes with Knox, I feel like all he ever talked about was Naomi basically as like a sex symbol. He was constantly commenting on her body and like his thought process when he would interact with her, you know, talking about her boobs, her butt, her skirt, all the things that he wanted to do to her, like constantly. It was a constant barrage. I don't know the word. Constant thought process running through his brain that we had to read about every interaction with Naomi. I don't know if that's like a normal thought process for guys. Any guys who are watching this video, let me know if anytime you see a hot girl, the only thoughts that you have are about her body in a sexualized manner. And then the other thing that super threw me off about this book is it's very spicy, like extremely spicy, like the spiciest book I've ever read. It just like threw me for a loop. I was listening to it, right? So I'm hearing these words out loud. It was so graphic. The sex scenes didn't happen until like probably the last third of the book maybe, and so you didn't have any of that. You had his thoughts, but they weren't that bad. But then when the sex scenes happened, it felt like I was listening to a porno. It like really threw me for a loop. I have no problem with spiciness in books. Like, I'm an adult. I have zero issue with that. But it was so much that I'm just like, really? Did we need to describe like his thing in this manner? Some of it was ridiculous, to be honest with you. Other than that, the chemistry between the two of them was really good. And Knox, honestly, he was like a really great guy. His relationship with Waylay was amazing. Like, he was the sweetest man. The way that he would pep talk Waylay or pep talk Naomi, it's weird because I say that he was like controlling and possessive, but then he was also super sweet. I think it was just like some of the things that he would say to Naomi. He would say, she's my girl, she's mine, nobody else can have her, but he's not even dating her, but nobody else can have her, and then order her around. At one point, he grabbed her over, they weren't even dating anymore, like they broke up. He grabbed her over her shoulder, and like her whole entire underwear is out, like at the bar where she's working, and he like carries her off like fireman style, and I think he like smacked her ass at one point and said like, you're coming with me, like, and she had no choice. And I'm like, you like this? This man just like dumped you and you like this. I'm like, okay. But other than that, he was a really sweet guy. The third act conflict of this book was also kind of like weird and cheesy and out of the blue. Obviously her sister and everything that happens with her sister comes back around, so like that's the last conflict of the book. It just felt weird to me. Like it kind of just was, I don't know, out of the blue. I mean, there was a reason for it when it came to the romance between the two characters, but it's still like, it just felt kind of cheesy to me. But overall, this book was really great. I do recommend it. If you don't like spice, don't read this book. If you like romance, I do highly recommend the book. It was a fun book to read if you can get over the little bit of possessiveness and controllingness that Knox has. If you're not super into the brooding, tattooed male Viking, as Naomi calls him, then I wouldn't read this book. But other than that, I did really, really like it. So the last book that I read also came highly recommended. So this one is The Very Secret Society of Irregular Witches, and I'm not even going to attempt to pronounce the author's last name. But this book is about Mika Moon, and she is a witch. And so in this like world, witches exist, but they are kind of in secret. Nobody really knows about them except for witches. They don't really hang out with other witches, so Mika is kind of just on her own. They like have meetings like every couple months just to like interact with each other and like share spells and whatnot. But other than that, the witches in this world pretty much live alone. They also are super, super isolated because of a spell that went bad. Any witch that is born is basically orphaned from childhood because parents immediately die because of that spell that went bad. Mika makes these online, basically YouTube videos pretending to be a witch, even though she actually is a witch. She like pretends to be a witch just so she has some connection with like the outside world. She obviously is in the outside world, but just so she feels like she isn't so isolated, she makes these YouTube videos about being a witch. Obviously she doesn't think anybody believes her, but one person does watch those videos and does believe her because she gets a message from Ian at Nowhere House that he needs a tutor for 3 young witches, and she goes just to see what it's all about, even though she probably could get murdered. And when she gets there, it's all true. There are 3 very young witches. There's Ian, Ian's husband Ken, and then Lucy, who is like the house caretaker, and then Jamie, who is the librarian. So it's very much a found family book, cozy fantasy, low stakes. So Mika is there because she needs to teach these 3 young witches how to generally control their magic before this man is going to come to the house. We don't want him to find out that magic exists, and he doesn't want the children to be exposed. But along the way, she develops relationships and friendships and love for the people of this home, the 3 young girls, you know, all of the characters in this book, and then also a slight romance between her and Jamie. And that's my biggest qualm with this book, was the romance between her and Jamie. Like, they talk about it on the back of the book, and then here's Jamie and Mika like in the book or on the front cover, and the romance in this book was like kind of non-existent. I felt like the majority of this book was taken up by the witchcraft and like the girls and just like forming the relationships with everybody in the house and not just Jamie, that like the romance between them didn't really develop. I feel like there wasn't a lot of chemistry between them. There were like some scenes that you could see was developing a little bit of a romance, but it was like, it was so non-existent. Or like they would just tell you, they would be like, hey, they're having conversations every night, but like we didn't really get to see the conversation. So like we as a reader didn't get to like see the relationship develop to like really make it feel like it was a believable relationship between these 2 people. I thought the 3 young witches were really, really cute. I did generally enjoy it. I did get a little bit bored in the second half of the book. I felt like it was decently fast-paced in the beginning, and I was like super excited to see where the story was going. But then it was a lot of like the same thing happening, just like missed opportunities between her and Jamie, just teaching the witches, saying, you know, just living at the house. Like I felt like there was not a lot going on in the second half of the book until the very, very, very end, like the last conflict part of the book. The other thing that like really put me off was there was like just random swear words thrown into this book. Without the sex scene and without the random swear words thrown in here. The rest of this book, I'd say 90% of this book, like it could have been read by like a middle grader. Like a 9 or 10-year-old, maybe 12-year-old could have read this book. And I feel like that was what it was like written for. But then the author was like, oh wait, this is actually an adult book. We need to remind the reader that there are adults reading this, so I need to throw some random swear words in here. And that's kind of how it was. It just was like a very childlike book and a super, super cozy atmosphere and like really wholesome. And then you would just randomly have an adult say like a swear word or a body part, male body part, and it was very jarring and did not fit with the vibe of the book. And then when Jamie and Mika finally got together, there was a very, very graphic sex scene that literally came out of nowhere. So graphic. It just was so out of place, and I felt like we didn't deserve it because we did not see enough of the romance blossom. Jamie was also just like super grumpy just for the sake of being grumpy. I really never super understood why he hated Mika so much in the beginning. So this is an enemies to lovers romance in this book if you like that sort of thing, but it was like enemies for no reason. Like Mika had no problem with Jamie. She was very nice to Jamie. And she was the one who was brought there, and Jamie was just like a jerk to her for no reason, just because that was his personality trait. The twist at the end was kind of fun. I did enjoy this book. It was still decent, but there was just those couple things that like, it just really was kind of odd that it was thrown in there. Overall, this was just a very cute, lighthearted book. Maybe again, I just don't like children in books because a lot of this book was about the children. So if you're thinking it's going to be like a romance book, it's not. Don't think that it is. It's very much a found family book, and Mika just getting to know all of the people in this book and the children and like falling in love with the children and the other adults in the story. The romance between the two was like very, very small, even though they claimed it was a lot bigger in the back of the book. Overall, rated at 3.5 stars. I do recommend it if you like any of the tropes that I just said in here, or if you just like want a super cute, wholesome, for the most part, story. I do still recommend this book. Okay, so that was every book I've read this year. It's 8 books. That's not that many because it's been like 4 months, so that's about one every 2 weeks, which isn't terrible. I will link all of those books down below if you want to check them out. If you're new here and you're realizing there isn't a lot of recent videos on my channel, that's because I've been gone for 10 years. You can hear all about what I've been up to in this video right here. I will be making videos every single Tuesday, so you can look out for another one a week from now. I hope you guys have a great rest of your day. Don't forget to share, like, subscribe, all of those things. It really helps with the channel, and I'll see you guys next week.